We saw in the earliest episodes that until about 40 years ago, science used to be defined as that branch of the search for knowledge which follows the scientific method. The scientific method was devised by Francis Bacon as the way to discover truth about the creation. It was based on three premises. Nature carries the stamp of the creator, man's reason carries the stamp of his own folly, and we will have it that all things are as we think they should be. To counter our foolishness, the scientific method is rooted in observation and measurement. As Mendeleev pointed out, science begins with measurement. According to Einstein, what can be measured is science, everything else is speculation. But when the secular humanist establishment gained complete control of science as a profession, they found that the scientific method was an embarrassment to their secular humanism. This was particularly true of their cherished theory of evolution. The study of genetics has been a great problem for evolution. One of the biggest problems is that the genetic code is subject to the most fundamental law of science, the second law of thermodynamics. Disorder increases with time. Always. Mutations always lead to corruption of information. The cell has marvellous machinery for correction of errors in DNA, but they can't correct every single mistake. In every generation, there are many mutations which get fixed in each person's DNA. Mutations to DNA cause genetic damage. When there's damage to absolutely vital functions, reproduction becomes impossible. Infertility is becoming a major problem, not only in man but in many life forms. Infertility clinics have mushroomed. So have infertility conferences. Some of the experts involved tell us that about a quarter of the world's population is already sterile, and the number is rising exponentially. This is a huge problem for evolution. Looking back in time, how far back can we go to the point where the genetic code was pristine and undamaged? It's certainly not millions of years. It's not hundreds of thousands of years. It's more like just a few thousand years. And that's far too short for the theory of evolution. But the scientific establishment doesn't require science to be based on observation and measurements. They denigrated the scientific method, denied its necessity for science, and came up with the statement, "Science is what scientists do." Thomas Kuhn gave the alternative, "A proposition is scientific if it is approved by the scientific establishment." That means that the scientific establishment can make their science whatever they choose. The scientific method requires that hypotheses are guided by observations and measurements. Anything which can't be objectively measured is not suitable for genuine science. Nothing dependent on subjective taste, beauty for example, in fact anything subject to free will, individual choice or personal consideration, is not amenable to scientific investigation. And there's no reason for thinking that such things will follow laws of nature. Now, just because these things are not amenable to the scientific method doesn't mean that they're not important. On the contrary, the workings of society, which are critically dependent on such things as personal choice, hopes, talents, morals, and aspirations, are vital for human well-being and happiness. But the abandoning of the scientific method and replacing by their approval or disapproval, the scientific establishment has expanded its dominion to the workings of society, even though they're outside the legitimate domain of science. The behaviour of society, individual behaviour, marriage, family, moral standards, are the prerogative of the Creator. He made us. He has the authority to tell us how we should lead our lives to achieve the goals and the health and happiness he intended for us. When man presumes to take over this prerogative, society is in a dangerous position. The Bible tells us that God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. After establishing Adam in the Garden of Eden, he said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make a helpmeet for him." And so God made Eve. He also made a decree for their progeny. A man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. There's a very clear distinction and an obvious complementarity between the two genders. In every cell of the male body there is one X chromosome and one Y chromosome. In every cell of the female body there are two X chromosomes. The X and Y chromosomes are called sex chromosomes because they determine a person's gender. The extra X chromosome in the female is much larger and contains much more information than the male Y chromosome. This isn't surprising because the female body is far more complex than the male body, and it takes much more information to build it. All this was established many years ago by science, real science, which is based on observation and measurement. The secular scientific establishment is now throwing this and many other things into confusion. The current cohort of postmodernists, recognized by the current secular scientific establishment as some kind of social scientists, have decided that there are no longer only two genders, male and female, but a whole range according to the whims of some confused postmodernist. And this now carries the stamp of scientific authority. They tell us their whimsical ideas are due to genetic variability, presumably due to variability in the sex chromosomes. Well, as with all genetic material, errors are happening in the sex chromosomes, but they're quite limited, probably because if they get too far from the norm, they will not be viable. In fact, many miscarriages have been found to be associated with mutations to the sex chromosomes. Most of such mutations which do not lead to miscarriages lead to infertility. Most of the remainder lead to physical or mental impairment. As with all unfortunate people damaged by mutations, they should receive our sympathy and compassion. But we see non-scientific, so-called social scientists stepping in with agendas promoting homosexuality under a gloss of science. Now, any discipline attempting to deal with the whole person is dealing with a spiritual battleground. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Sadly, many people don't realize this and play with dangerous things like pornography, witchcraft and drugs, not realizing they're giving ground for the principalities and powers to wreak havoc in their lives. The postmodernist social scientists love to claim that the cause of homosexuality and gender confusion in general is genetic. It may be possible that genetic damage does play a part in some cases, but the Bible tells us the root cause. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were they thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Therefore, God gave them up to uncleanness in the lusts of their hearts, to dishonour their bodies among themselves. Any among us who do what they want to do, instead of what God says we should do, risks being given over to the principalities and powers to dishonour their bodies according to the unclean lusts of their own hearts. Thank you for joining me for this episode. If you enjoyed it, Please like, subscribe and press the bell so that you'll be notified as I release new movies. If you'd like to support this project, you're welcome to do so through Patreon. Find a link on my channel banner and in the description below.